Okay, welcome to acrylic painting. So this video is for Forsyth Tech specifically, but if you're just trying to start out doing acrylic painting, this will apply to you. Every bit of information I'm about to give you. It's a pretty all-inclusive talk about paint and supplies. I'll get to the paint at the very end. Stick around to the end because that's really important. What kind of paints you're going to pick and what colors of paints that you're going to pick to get started out. So let's just begin with some of our tools. So of course, one of the main things that anybody is going to use whenever they're painting is a brush. So everyone wonders, what kind of brushes should I get? And when you're starting out, there's so much money going into, because you got to buy everything all at the same time. So naturally, you're looking for bargains. But let me suggest to you that the usual bargains actually are not bargains at all. And what you might think of as expensive is actually the way you want to go. What you'll notice is when you're going through the store and you're shopping or you're looking online, you're going to see that there are just these big packs of brushes. And so, I can get 10 brushes for 14 cents. Okay, maybe it's a little more than that, but the idea is that it seems like an economy pack. The problem is the brushes are just terrible. They're going to tend to be brushes like this. See how wide and spread out the bristles are on this brush? This is actually a pretty good brush, but it's been used for about 15 years, and I use it for being able to do like little stippling effects or something like that. But it's not a brush that you can get accurate lines developed with. You want a brush that it holds together really well. And so if you're going to use a flat, which is what I always suggest to use, flats are brights. Brights are just flats that have shorter bristles. But you'll notice that this flat holds together really well both directions. And so this is what I'm going to paint with about 95% of my painting. And you're like, well, how could you use that big brush for all the details and stuff? If it holds together real fine, the corner point of that is going to be, you're going to be able to do some really fine details with that. So what brand of brush should you get? I'm going to suggest just go to a store, go to a Michael's, go to Hobby Lobby, which is right here in this area. And at Hobby Lobby, they have the Master's Touch brushes. They're a pretty good brush. I've never really had any problems with them. They hold together really well. If you're going to get online, a pretty inexpensive brush is Princeton brush. That's a nice option. There's also these Pro Stroke brushes. You'll have to get those online, but I find that they're a pretty good brush. They don't cost a whole lot. They hold up really well. So you want to start with a brush that's about this size. Let me show you kind of right here, a little bit of detail on that. The brushes that are this large will help you to cover a lot of acreage, without trying to do that with something like this. So if you're trying to cover the entire canvas, a little brush like that's going to take you 40 years, whereas this will just take a few minutes. So that's why I suggest this. You can get a lot of paint on, or you can do a lot of detail work. So if you're able to do detail work and get paint on, how many of these or how many brushes in between this size do you actually need? I would say just this brush is going to get you most of what you need to do. Maybe a brush about this size also. Whenever you're selecting brushes, one thing you want to watch out for when you first pick them up in the store, they're going to look absolutely perfect, sharp as a razor. But what the problem is they actually have starch on them. We call that sizing. And you want to break that sizing. Just rub it to the side a little bit. And if the brush still holds together good, then you've got a good brush. But lots of times when you break that sizing, you'll have hairs sticking this way and that way, and it's not, you know, going to be a good brush for you. If you buy them online, how do you know? And so what I suggest is actually go to a store and try that out. Later on, and when you find a brush that you like, then you can order them online. You won't have to make that trip to the store. But I would suggest beginning out with a large brush like this, and you're like, Craig, so what size is it if I look on here to see the number? Unfortunately, depends on which brand it is. This could be a number 8, this could be a 6, this could be a 12. It just depends on the brand, so it's kind of hard to go by the number. I would just say have a nice close look at these and get something somewhere in that range, okay? If you're going to get another brush, the only other brush I would suggest is a fan brush, and it's not because I suggest to do, you know, the Bob Ross thing where you just place that fan brush over and over again and make a happy little tree. But what I suggest is to get a hog's hair bristle fan brush, and you'll notice mine has some real serious damage to it. It's got big gaps broken out of it and so forth. That's on purpose. This is a tool that I have students make that I call a modified fan brush, and you can see a video for that. I'll link a video at the end of this one that points you to this so that you can make one of these yourself. Excellent tool for being able to paint grasses or to do really, really fine detail. So that's something you might want. A palette knife is a must-have. Whenever you're mixing paint, never mix paint with a brush because you get paint in the brush. It's hard to get the paint completely out of the brush. So when you go to mix your next color, you're also adding the paint that you just were using, and you may end up with a color that you don't even know how you got there. Palette knife is a really good tool for being able to mix, and then with one swipe of a paper towel, it's perfectly clean. You can go on to the next mix. You can also do palette knife painting, and you know, that's maybe something for a much different class. Now, if you're trying to save a little bit of money, you can get one of these plastic palette knives. Doesn't cost hardly anything. The problem with them are they are a little thick. They're usable. So if you're trying to cut a corner, that might be one way to go about it. But I would later on invest in a good metal palette knife. And you know, if you're trying to do some palette knife techniques, a metal palette knife is the way to go. If you have a little trouble with being able to get your dimensions right whenever you're painting, whenever you're drawing and you're trying to get your drawing accurate, these proportional divider tools are really excellent for being able to do that, particularly if you're working from a photo reference, because you can adjust this to some dimension that you're trying to get on the photo reference, and then you'll be able to transfer that to your canvas. So that's a nice tool to have. They cost about $15 on Amazon. So, you know, it's not that much money. Another tool that is absolutely crucial whenever you're doing acrylic painting is you need to keep the paint moist enough on the canvas and also on your palette, because if your paint's dry out on your palette, that's just wasted paint. Nobody wants to waste paint. It's relatively expensive. So the way you go about keeping that paint moist is to use some water. And you can get one of those plant sprayers that, maybe at Dollar Tree or something. But the problem with those is the amount of water per air. It does not atomize the water very well. And so you get larger droplets. And when you start spritzing your canvas, you may very well end up with runs, and then you might destroy a beautiful painting that way. So you want a spritzer that actually atomizes well. It's called a spritz bottle. Urban Artist is the brand, and they make a really nice fine mist. So that's a great thing to have. The problem is, now if you're older or if you have arthritis in your hands or something, you'll find that these are really stiff, and it may be difficult for you to spritz with these. Also, I've noticed you only get about a year out of these before they just kind of give out and stop spraying anymore. So another option, and a really fine option, is you can get this from your hairdresser, absolutely. Real nice fine mist, and it does a real long fine mist, a lot more water. These go for $8 to $12 online on Amazon, and so they're great because it has a big plunger for you to be able to use. Really easy to do it. It's not going to hurt your hands at all. So this is what I use personally now. Anytime that you're acrylic painting, you're also going to need to wash your brush out. And most people will get a baby food jar or some kind of cup or something to put some water in. And all I'm going to say about that as far as cups is concerned is the more open it is, the easier it is to get your brush in there and get it clean. If it's in something like this, you're really not able to kind of bend the brush and get it cleaned off. So I would use a larger bowl like this as opposed to some kind of small jar. But both of these are not the best thing to have. Again, if you're trying to save cost, you may go with something like this to begin with, but later on invest in a brush washer. And a brush washer is a bucket that has a lid on it, and it has snap-on clasps so that you can transport it with the water in it and it won't get all over your car. It has a basket in it. That basket has a little place to be able to rub on this bar that goes across here to wash your brush out. It also has holes in the bottom, so it doesn't sit all the way at the bottom of your brush washer bucket, so that when you're using this to clean your brush out, any sludge, any old paint that's on your brush is going to go through the screen and down into the bottom of the bucket, so that you're always using really nice clean water to do your cleaning with. And naturally, when we're talking about these other ones, the sludge builds up, and if you're reaching down at the bottom, you're trying to wash your brush in sludge. And so naturally, that's not going to be ideal for being able to get your brush washed out. Okay, let's talk about canvases. Now, when you show up for class, you may think, okay, I want a nice big picture, something I can put up on the wall, something I can be proud of. But when you come to a class, try to think of it this way, that you're not trying to create a masterpiece. And let me speak to that for just a minute, because everybody wants to paint a good painting, right? If you paint a painting that you're not happy with, and you're not wanting anybody else to see it because you're kind of embarrassed by it or whatever like that. But when you come to a class, try to keep this in mind, that you're there to learn things. You're there to learn techniques. You're there to learn concepts about painting. And so as you're doing that, it's going to be a struggle. You're not just painting, but you're trying to learn something about painting. So try to think of it this way, that if I succeed in trying out that technique that I was taught today, if I succeed in trying out that concept about light, about color, or whatever it is, no matter how my painting comes out as far as how appealing it is, I have succeeded today. And so what I suggest is, anytime that you're in a class, to paint very small paintings. It's just helpful because you're not having to cover so much acreage. It doesn't take as long to get through it, and it gives you a little more time to kind of play around with it and work on those techniques. So I suggest an 8 by 10. That's a good size, and it doesn't really matter whether you use a 8 by 10 panel or whether you use a cotton canvas. Either way, the only thing I will say about these is, if you get the usual canvases, you're going to find that they're very rough. And whenever you go to cover them with paint, you'll find that it leaves little speckly white dots, and that's because the paint is not covering every little bit of that weave in the canvas material. And so you can then buy those more expensive paintings, the ones that say like Premier, or some kind of name that makes you know that it's better than the regular canvases. Generally speaking, the only difference in them, the ones that are expensive to these cheaper ones, is that they have another coat of gesso on them, and whereas these only have one coat, they may have 2 or 3 coats. You can buy gesso, and it's an acrylic based thing that you can take just a regular brush, like a household paintbrush, and just paint it on there, let it dry, sand it with some real fine sandpaper so that it smooths it out, maybe put another coat on an hour or so later and sand it again. And so you have your premium canvases that way, and gesso is really quite inexpensive, so that's a way to go. Now, as far as sizes are concerned, I would suggest never go any larger than 11 by 14 when you're taking a class. All right, so let's move on from canvases. Paper towels. You're going to have something to clean your brushes off with. I even use paper towels really often. If you watch my videos, I'll use paper towels for being able to just cover a wash onto a canvas. I'll use it to do textures and so forth like that. It's actually a really good tool. But if you use the wrong paper towels, it'll end up leaving all kinds of little linty pieces all over your canvas, and that's not good. So you want a paper towel that's more clothy instead of papery. A Bounty paper towel, not getting any plugs from Bounty, but they tend to be something in between, where they're a little bit clothy, a little bit papery, and that's ideal. To me, that is an ideal type of paper towel. So just look, feel your own paper towels, try wetting them and rubbing them on a surface and see what happens with it. That'd be helpful. Okay, next thing, you have to put your paint out on something, right? So what most people do, getting ready to be, you know, a big-time artist, and so they go out and they get something special like this. I'm being a little bit facetious and a little bit tongue-in-cheek about it, because whoever manufactures these, it just seems sinful. Because whereas you have these nice places to put your paint out around the sides, which they're actually pretty good for that, you only have this little bitty spot in the middle to do your paint mixing. And you know, you mix one color, you have to wash it out to be able to mix another color. That really slows things down and is not very efficient use of your paint either. If you're gonna have this, or if you already have one, maybe somebody passed one on to you, use that for putting your paints out on. You can use a paper plate, you know, for doing your mixing. That's a good cheap way of being able to do it. Another way of being able to do that is to use palette paper. And so palette paper is almost like a, you know, a sketching canvas, sketching pad, where it just peels off, and you can lay this out and put your paints on there. You'll notice that the color is gray. Some of them come white. I would suggest you get the gray because you're able to see your colors more accurately against a gray background. And so that's very helpful. One of the things that's a huge problem with paints in general, but acrylic paints even more, is that acrylic paints will dry out. They dry out really quickly. It's their strength and their weakness, because there are certain techniques that you might want to do where, because it dries out fast, you can layer over top of it, and that just speeds up your ability to get a painting finished in a shorter period of time. Now, one thing that you can buy that is helpful for being able to keep your paints from drying out so quickly is to get one of these plastic boxes, and it comes with a thin kind of sponge-like material that you can get wet. You wouldn't want to put your paints on that sponge. You'd end up having to wash them out. But you can take some palette paper and line your tray with the palette paper, and so with the wet sponge in there, it'll actually kind of soak into your palette paper and the paints will get kind of wet. Another thing you can do is spritz them before you put the snap-on lid on top if you're saving them for later. And I even do this, either take a sponge or take some paper towels and wet them. If you have your paints out and around the sides, that will help to create even more humidity inside that box, keep it nice and wet, and so your paints may last for a time. The thicker the globs of paint, the more likely you're going to be able to reuse them. Paint that you have already mixed and it's all thin and everything, it's going to have a tendency to just dry out even in a box like that. So here's another option, is glass palettes. The thing I like about a glass palette is there's no waste. Like, you have to wad up and throw away those palette papers, and you know, okay, so it's not huge, but it's an environmental issue of sorts. With this, you can take a flat blade scraper and just scrape it off. You can clean this really quickly and easily. So glass palettes are really nice to have. They're a little pricey compared to some of these other options. I make these myself and have snap-on lids that stay down real nice and close to the paint, so that it keeps the paint wet, because there's not a lot of air inside like there is inside of these big boxes like this. And so that is an option to go with, to get a glass palette. particularly if it has a snap-on lid that snaps down real nice and low. Okay, so we're going to get into paints, and paints are just huge. They're like probably the most important thing that you want to think about with painting is what paints to get, how many of different kinds of paints to get. So I'd like to ask you to look on my site, on my YouTube channel, for using a limited palette. If you're starting out painting, you absolutely need to start out with a limited palette. You don't want to try to buy every color in the rainbow so that you have that color to be able to use. Learn to mix paint, and the paints that I suggest for you to get is a really nice palette of paints that will help you to learn how to do almost any kind of color mixing. But I'm going to go into some few options about paints. You know, there is a wide range of paints, different brands. The different brands, the colors are not consistent from brand to brand, and the price is hugely, just vastly different. First thing that I want to say is there are paints that are called basic paints. Just like I'm not being paid by anybody else to say something nice about their paints, basics are not paying me to tell you, most certainly are not asking me to tell you that that is not a good option. That's equal to the big packs of brushes. So you get these big tubes of paint and you're like, oh, they cost almost nothing, like $5 for a big tube of paint. And it may be a way to go initially. Once you run out of a tube of it, most certainly go with something a little bit better quality. What you're going to run into really quickly is there's very little pigment per binder in those paints. And so whereas it seems like it is a good deal, the problem is that it will just not have the richness to color that you need for it to have. So some of the good middle of the road paints are Winsor and Newton. Those can be obtained locally, a number of places. Liquitex. If you go over to Jerry's Artorama in Greensboro, you can get Charvin paints there. The best of the best paints is Golden, but you will really pay for it. So Golden is an expensive paint, but it has the quality to it of pigment equal to most oil paints. And so I know professional painters that use Golden exclusively, and their work is in galleries. You're probably not going to see gallery work you know, with any of these other paints. So another brand of paint that you may want to consider when you're starting out is the Master's Touch paint. So Master's Touch is, it's not a super high quality paint, but it's okay. It's definitely not like basic. So it has a fair amount of pigment in it, not great, but it's an okay paint. Let's talk about paint colors. And so, as I was saying, you know, the golden white, the titanium white is a good way to go. But also, the Winsor & Newton Galleria paint is a very fine paint. It's really a good titanium white. So I would go that way. If you're starting out, it's going to be much cheaper than the golden. Then, with the rest of your paints, let me suggest to you that you go to my video on using a limited palette. That will give you some real good insights into the type of paints that you might want to use. Definitely start with a limited palette when you're starting out. It will teach you about color mixing. If you try to go out and buy all of the different types of paints, it's just so expensive, and you know, there are just a plethora, a rainbow of colors that you could choose from, but you never really learn how to mix. And I hope you have a lot of money if you're gonna go out and try to buy every hue of color that's out there. So let's stick with a light and dark version of each of the primaries and a warm and cool version of the primaries. If you don't know what I mean about warm and cool paints, I'll also have a video that you can look up on warm and cool paints, and so that it would be actually very helpful to you. Okay, so let's look for a light cool paint, and you can get a this is a master's touch right here. It's a yellow light. You can also find in Winsor & Newton and various different brands something that's called a lemon yellow. And so on the color scale of yellows on the color wheel, you'll find that these yellows are a little closer to green as far as a yellow. So they are very cool yellow, very light colored yellow. Then you want that warm dark yellow. And yellow is inherently light, so it's not going to be super dark, but it will be darker. And so there are several versions. So I call this kind of a school bus yellow. You can get that, it's called a diarylide yellow. Or with Liquitex, there is a yellow-orange Azo. Really like that yellow-orange Azo. A different option that it's going to be the same hue, the same color, is the Winsor & Newton Galleria, and it is a cadmium yellow deep. So deep is the key thing. So you'll notice it's that same kind of school bus yellow. So it's a little darker yellow. It's also very warm. It's almost orangey. So that's a good way to go. Light and cool, dark and warm yellow. Okay, then you have cadmium reds. As far as your red, if you get Winsor & Newton cadmium red hue is a good way to go. Or you could get the Galleria Winsor & Newton cadmium red medium is also okay. And then if you want to get a cheaper version, the Master's Touch, a Naphthol crimson. So it's still, you know, one way or another, what we're talking about is stop sign red, okay? And I'm saying that because there are cadmiums out there, like here's a cadmium red light, and you got to really watch with the cadmium red light. It is not actually just kind of a lighter version, so it's not as dark as the cadmium red. That's not what that means when it says cadmium red light. Don't really know why that nomenclature is that way. It's actually an orangey version, so it has a little bit of yellow in it. So when you look at it, it's most certainly not that stop sign red. It's kind of an orangey red, and if you get that and you try to mix it with another color, you're not going to end up with the color that you're shooting for because it has a little bit of yellow in it also. So I'm going to put that over here. This is the batch of don't buy that. So no cadmium red light. So you've got your stop sign red. That is a nice warm light colored red. Now for a dark cool red, this is beautiful, is the Golden brand alizarin crimson red. And so that's a really dark cool red. Wonderful selection. Very expensive again with the golden paint. So a little bit less expensive. Now you'd have to order this. You won't be able to buy this locally. But the Utrecht brand Cadmium Red Extra Deep is a good dark red and a nice cool red. But when you look at it, you can see immediately that it's not as dark as that alizarin crimson. So it's the less acceptable option as far as the color is concerned, but a little bit cheaper option. Okay, so we've got our light cool yellow, our dark warm yellow, our light warm red, our dark cool red. Now what about blues? So we've got the Winsor & Newton ultramarine, or pretty much any ultramarine. I've noticed across the brands that of all the colors that seem to be pretty consistent, ultramarine is that color. I do like the Winsor & Newton. I think it's a little richer, little darker blue. So ultramarine is definitely your way to go for your dark, cool blue. And now I'm going to talk about some blues to not get, because they are nice dark blues, but they are phthalo blues. So the golden phthalo blue, and then there's the Winsor & Newton Windsor blue, but they're the same thing. They are a phthalo color, and they just make your paintings electric. You cannot mix enough other paint with this to get the paint colors to be a blended paint color. And when you get finished with your painting, your entire painting is going to seem electric because of the phthalo that's in there. Now, why would you even have a phthalo? Well, there's cases like, say, where an ocean wave is turning over and the light is shining through the wave. You know, that really brilliant, beautiful light that shines through the waves, the green or the blue. Something really super strong like a phthalo color will give you the ability to paint something like that. So that's something you may keep in your kit if you have the money for it. But I would suggest, just sticking with a nice ultramarine blue. So that's your dark, cool blue. But what about your warm, light blue? Some good options. I'm going to start with the expensive one again, which is golden, is a manganese blue. And that is your best light, warm blue option. But again, it's very expensive. So that may not be something that you want to select right off the bat. A good alternative is a Liquitex Brilliant Blue. And I'm going to show this to you because it's really a nice, warm, light blue, very pretty, and it's inexpensive. So there's a good way to go for your light, warm blue. So another option for you for a light, warm blue is a cerulean. This is a Winsor & Newton Galleria cerulean blue. But I suggest that if you can get the brilliant blue or the manganese blue, go that direction. This is a Winsor & Newton Galleria cerulean blue. It's still that light, warm blue, but it's what we refer to as a neutralized blue. So a neutralized blue is a synonym for that might be dull, so it's a little bit dull straight out of the tube. So I would go with the manganese, or I would go with the brilliant blue if I could. Okay, so that covers our primary colors. And you can mix almost any color with a primary color. If you're going to add to your limited palette something else, I would suggest to go with an orange and a purple. And so a cadmium orange is a good way to go. The reason is, if you mix yellow and red together, you'll never get a orange that has the same intensity to it as something straight out of the tube. As far as purple, I like the Galleria, the Winsor Newton purple. It's called a Winsor Violet. And then as an option, you have the Master's Touch, which is a prism violet, and it's okay, but it's a little reddish. It's not a good middle of the road violet, and it's not quite as dark as the Winsor & Newton either. So the Winsor & Newton is a better option, I believe. Okay, the last thing that I keep on my palette is some browns. And so always want to have a nice burnt sienna. A burnt sienna is kind of a reddish brown, and the best reddish brown that you can get is a Winsor & Newton Professional Acrylic. Really love that brown. A nice reddish brown, but as an option, the Charvin burnt sienna is pretty good. Now, if you get any of the other burnt siennas, like if you get a Master's Touch burnt sienna, or definitely get a cheaper brand, the colors are skewed. They may be too yellow, they may be too red, and those two that I just suggested are probably a really good way to go. Now, the last thing I would say, and I would say this is a must, is get a burnt sienna. So a burnt sienna is a real nice dark brown, and that brown is something that when you mix it with any number of other colors, you're going to find that you can get a real nice neutralized look to the color without having to go through a lot of work to get there. So that is the basics of paints and supplies to getting started out. Now, I know that was a lot of information. You can go back and watch this again, take some notes and so forth to try to figure out what you're going to do. But this will head you in a really good, solid direction. I'm looking forward to seeing you in class. If you've watched this, it's probably because I'm teaching the class. And we're going to have some fun painting together, and you're definitely going to learn a lot as well. So come on out. We'll have a good time. Thanks.